So we got a great looking sunset swing here. We're able to get two stills of this swing. I don't think it's the same swing, both the front view and the down the line, but it's going to give us a real great idea of sometimes when you only have one view, how some things can be obscure. And so this is always best case scenario when we get to do both sides at the same time. And so the big thing that we're going to look at here, we got three takeaways from this swing. And so the first one is our back hip and our loading pattern onto that leg in the downswing. We are not going to use our lower body properly to load onto it. And so what's going to end up happening is we're going to spin out. The second is, and because of that, we're going to start to slide off the ball and we're going to, or sway off the ball. There's a few different terms for it, but basically we're going to be moving off the ball, which this front view is going to show us very well. And then the last thing is going to be kind of the final compensatory mechanism is we're going to try and save it by doing a couple of funky different things by moving back onto the ball, but having a stalled out lower body. And so this is a great example of how proper loading of your right hip and getting into a good spot of your backswing with your lower body will stop a lot of these inconsistencies, particularly in this shot here where we hit it fat. And so if we're going to start with the top here, we're going to look at winding back what this right hip does. And so if we come to kind of our first positional check at the top and also do the first thing at the bottom, we're going to see how straight this knee is on both of them, and our leg and our knee need to be slightly bent. We need to have some bit of a squat, even though if it straightens, and that's okay. It's not that you can't swing like that, but we need to have a really ferocious follow through with our lower body. And so some great players that have a straightening leg, Dustin Johnson comes to mind. So clearly he's doing some great things, but he also has a phenomenal work ethic and core strength and flexibility to allow him to get into a position where he cuts the ball because he's using his legs so much to clear that he's not having to have much of a handsy release. And so if we take this position here on the bottom screen and we start going back, what ends up happening is our hip over rotates and we're trying to get this club to the top. And so what ends up happening with this red line here is going to show is that we're going to start moving off of this line back behind the ball. And so the big pitfall when we get to the top of our swing and we start really coming back behind the ball is what we want to do is we want to start to move forward back onto the ball, but we also want to try and clear our hips. And so it's really hard to do both at the exact same time. If we end up sliding onto the ball too fast, then our hands and our club get too far in front of the ball and we won't have a chance to catch up and we end up slicing it or pushing it really far. If we end up stopping or stalling out, which we see here, then the club bottoms out early and we end up getting a weak push or a big fat shot. And so I think if we were on grass, we would see a big old pelt come up behind this thing, but because we're on a driving mat, it's bouncing into the ball, which actually helps correct it. At the top screen, when we come up here, we can see how positionally we're actually in a really good spot. We're loaded up quite well into our backside, albeit we're probably not having the best technique to get there if we don't have the downswing going well. But positionally with our hands in relation to our swing plane, if we draw a couple of those lines, we're actually in a pretty decent spot. We come a little bit underneath, but c'est la vie. We've got a good face angle coming back. Got a very neutral face kind of correlating here and here with our spine. And so overall, we're going with a very neutral swing where the hands are not going to have to do a whole lot. Looking at the top one and coming down, we get the hands beautifully kind of over our stomach. We create a lot of lag in the club, and we can see how far ahead our hands are when we get down in here. When we start to come into impact and transition, this is where our hips are stalling out, and we can see how straight the legs are, how bent the upper body is, and in part, on the bottom screen, we're going to see this quite a lot, that we have this great move where we do this kind of like little squat to get back over. And so now we've moved back over onto the ball, but now the legs have to stop to let the arms catch up. And so what we end up seeing here is a big old chicken wing. And so if we get rid of all these lines and we zoom in a little bit to make it easier. So we're going to come through into impact right about oh, let's just say here. And so what we end up seeing is we want to make sure that we have some great extension through the golf ball. And if we're trying to hold on to try and hold that face and where it's going, then we're going to have a really difficult time extending properly because we're trying to retract our arms in order to control it, to kind of speed it up. So we end up having this kind of like sucking in motion with the arms. And we see here in a couple frames after, we almost get to like a putting stroke position with our elbows. We can see how bent the arms and the elbows are. We're not really allowing this club to go down the line properly. This is a very common position and quite indicative of holding off and trying to steer the club if we've come far too on the inside and we're trying to prevent the big flip. Overall, great swing. Fundamentals are fantastic. I think a few little tweaks to really feel how that left arm can be really straight through the golf ball, and having the right hip try and pause a little bit and getting some more load will allow us to create more power and better consistency coming through the strike without sacrificing a lot of this hand and wrist motion to try and save in kind of this flippy finish that unfortunately, well, here today, it worked out, it bounced into the mat, and you got yourself a nice little straight shot. Uh, but in all other purposes with the grass, we're going to be quite inconsistent with our strike.